What if I told you there's a legal way to buy real estate, not just real estate, there's businesses, make millions in that, still owe nothing to the IRS?
The whole concept of depreciation, it's American as hell. You know, back in the early 1900s, people building massive businesses. Obviously, this country was experiencing an economic boom.
They're utilizing gigantic tax credits like this for a reason. So I think it's important to kind of highlight and go over.
Building massive businesses. Obviously, this country, largest transfers of wealth. Baby boomers just coming of age. If you buy a business, you
So, good morning, everyone, or depends where you're at. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kylie Brown, and I got some of my colleagues here with me today. I got Daniel Patrick, Giovanni Olivia, Kevin Barrett, and Andrew Clements all here with us. Today, we're going to go over bonus depreciation. So we're going to focus in on the bonus depreciation, where it came from, and go through some of the details. So what if I told you there's a legal way to buy real estate, not just real estate, there's businesses, make millions in that, and still owe nothing to the IRS. We're going to kind of go through that. It's not really a tax situation, but there is loopholes, but it's the power of bonus depreciation. So for the first person, I'm going to bring up Daniel Patrick. He's up here with me right now in good old Wildwood, Missouri. So Daniel, the floor is yours.
I'm sure we're going to get into the details as far as like the nerdy numbers and stuff like that. We've got some people here that know a lot more about it than I do, but I just think the whole concept of depreciation, it's really like it's American as hell. The whole reason it got started, you know, back in the early 1900s, you had people building massive businesses. Obviously this country was experiencing an economic boom in the early 1900s, new manufacturing processes, things like that. And you had all these business owners that were just paying absorbent amounts of tax to the government. Meanwhile, they're putting all this sweat equity into their business. They're buying all this equipment. And so these people banded together and was just like, hey, like we need a break because our equipment is wearing out. And so the government was just like, all right, fair enough. So, early 1900s, the wear and tear started entering the tax code. And that's just kind of what kicked this whole thing off to what it is today. There's all sorts of different types of depreciation. There's straight line, there's accelerated. You've got it spread across an asset's quote unquote useful life, which I'm sure that we'll get into during this session as well. But, after the 1900s, like after people started to be able to depreciate their equipment, then you had developers start to get a little bit of FOMO, right? Like, well, wait a second, how come these people are able to depreciate their equipment? Like, I should be able to depreciate my land improvements. And so, fast forward to the 1920s and 1930s, real estate was now treated equally as, the equipment. Like developers started to lobby and then buildings were then recognized as depreciable assets. And the whole logic behind it is, structures, equipment, whatever it is you're depreciating, it deteriorates, right? It becomes obsolete. And so buildings, just like equipment, become obsolete. Land doesn't, which, that part's still in force today. You can't depreciate a piece of dirt because it's always just going to be a piece of dirt. But it's kind of cool how that came about. First it was equipment, and then developers banded together and started lobbying for buildings to be depreciable. But as this was happening, the government and anybody with a brain started to see that it stimulated business growth. If you look in history, any time that depreciation, like the tax code, was modified in that territory, it resulted in a boom. And even after the 1920s and 30s, like the post-World War II boom, depreciation became like a development engine, especially in the 1950s and 60s. Like we saw explosive industrial and suburban expansion because of the accelerated cost recovery system, acres, right? Which basically allowed people to accelerate the depreciation and front load that wear and tear. Again, it was just one of those times in history where the government was just like, okay, go. And even more recently, Trump, love him or hate him, he extended the 2017 tax schedule, and I'm already starting to feel it. Like, people are, when you buy a piece of equipment for your company, real estate investors, obviously it stimulates the economy. And so I just really think it's cool, like how the whole depreciation thing got started. It was kind of one of the most American things I've ever heard of after I read the story. And I didn't really know what the heck I was going to talk about leading up to this podcast, because I know we're going to get into the math and all that stuff, but just know, like, depreciation it's a good thing. It stimulates the economy. And, if people aren't absolutely taking the most advantage of it, like, you're just leaving money on the table.
Yeah, understood, Daniel. Real quick, so you're saying it stimulates the economy. So how does that affect the everyday person, though? Like, I mean, I know it's beneficial for a lot of the business owners, but and anybody can jump in, but how does that affect the everyday person?
Jobs. I mean, that's my knee-jerk reaction to that question is that if a company is able to expand because of things like depreciation and other, savvy tax avoidance strategies, then that leaves more room for growth. And when you have more growth, you need more manpower. You can't be a one-man show, right? And so I think it means jobs for people. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and I can jump in there on the.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, I can almost hear people asking, isn't this just another way to dodge taxes for the rich? And I think that's fair to see off the bat. But if you look at it, you can't just take these depreciations and run off to Costa Rica and start buying real estate over there. So, and if you think about real estate as a whole, which is why I love real estate, we're real estate guys here. It's so interconnected in every part of our economy, from the whole supply chain, from development all the way through to the improvements, whether that's residential, along that supply chain, materials, jobs, all that money flows into other areas. People earn it, they go spend it in their communities, and then all the way to the end asset, right? If somebody's making money off flipping homes or renting homes, then if it's commercial, you have all these guys that are putting in businesses across the nation, from Starbucks, McDonald's, Safeways, all these other retailers and services. And so it's the backbone of our economy, right? And all of that adds to the GDP. And this is what I love about it, actually, because what it really does, it keeps the money in the US, right? That's the big part of it, right? All of these depreciations are taken. People can reinvest in research and development here in the US. All that money stays in America. And the health, one of the major indicators is GDP. And that all adds to the bottom line. So that's kind of what I got excited about when I first dove into it. And it is intricate. There's obviously layers to this, and I'll let some of the other guys jump in. But yeah, that for me was huge. Where you say, Daniel, that this is really truly American. It is, because this is Team America, right? We want America's economy to do well. And this is not just a loophole. It's actually a policy change, and that's what's good about it.
Yeah, no, I think the tax write-off, the deduction, depreciation stimulates more people to create a business or generate, more revenue to, because they can write it off, because it's not all about how much money you can make. It's about how much money can you keep. So, I think there's going to be a big part of that. And I'll let Andrew jump in because he's about to say something as well.
Yeah, which I think, at a high level, people are listening to podcasts, and most people kind of fit in the buckets that aren't billionaires, right? There's only, 2,000 and some change billionaires in the world, but, they're utilizing gigantic tax credits like this for a reason. So I think it's important to kind of highlight and go over, how this can be utilized by the everyday person. And first and foremost, it starts with something that generates income, right? Bonus depreciation really only applies to a business or an investment property, so not personal use. So that means you can benefit from it if you own or buy rental property, invest in a different syndication or land development deal, et cetera, or buy a business, short-term rentals, landscaping, construction, vending, things with, a lot of different vehicle and equipment costs as well. And basically you can use it to offset active or passive income depending on your situation. So like if you're a real estate professional or married to one, bonus depreciation can definitely offset that income. If you're not, you can still offset passive income from rentals, side businesses, or syndications. This basically means massive tax refund or lower tax bill for anyone without selling anything, right? But definitely a huge chunk of this that can be really applicable to a lot of people that I think is large in part overlooked is to participate in a development or a syndication. You don't have to personally build the roads or pave the driveways, but many normal investors join real estate funds or syndications that allocate a part of their capital to land improvements, et cetera, et cetera. They receive a K-1 with a large depreciation or loss in year one, which they can help lower their taxes, which is pretty incredible. I'm sure Kevin will go through the numbers because he's a a whiz on that front, but you can also leverage equipment or small businesses purchases. If someone runs like a side hustle or a small business, bonus depreciation can apply to any vehicles over 6,000 pounds, like trucks, SUVs used for business, machinery, tools, computers, furniture, office equipment, etc. Right? So somebody buys a $70,000 SUV for their landscaping business, they can potentially deduct the most of it in year one instead of over 5 years with the new big beautiful bill. Obviously, speak with a tax professional regarding all of this. We're just trying to give a high level overview and
That's not
inspire people, because I'm not that CPA, Dan, as you know, but just as like a playbook for people, definitely own and invest in something income producing, identify the bonus depreciation opportunities, get a pro to structure it, use those deductions on your tax bill, and gives you an opportunity to reinvest those savings and to grow your wealth faster.
Here's an idea, guys. Why don't we, for the listeners, why don't we take a couple of simple examples, like a W-2 employee, and then somebody who's saying investing in Airbnb, and walk them through
that's
a
more
scenario.
typical. Yeah, definitely.
So Kevin, maybe you want to kind of lead into this.
Yeah,
exactly. Let's think about kind of who's listening. So
I'm going to jump in, guys.
Well, let's look at the mindset, right, of somebody that's already paying so much in taxes through their W-2. And why don't you explain, like, how does real estate actually help them lower that using this bill?
Right. So if you're in a 1031 exchange, especially, like if you go into any asset that has a useful life less than 25 years, actually with 20 years with the modified accelerated cost recovery system, any asset placed in service after January 19th qualifies for 100% bonus depreciation.
That's for this year?
Yeah. So with a big, beautiful bill that came out, that was signed into law on July 4th of this year. Any asset placed in service after January 19, 2025 qualifies for 100% bonus depreciation. So now if you place that asset in service prior to that, then with the tax cuts and the Job Act of 2017 that Daniel brought up earlier, it would be 40% this year. So what does that mean for you? Well, if you're a real estate professional, right, you spend either 100 hours a year managing short-term rentals, or you spend more than 750 hours a year managing just other types of real estate. You could be a property manager, you could be a real estate agent, right? Or you just manage multifamily assets, commercial assets, anything with the exception of a short-term rental. You can use that income to offset W-2, capital gains and other assets, interest, dividends, right? Just across the board. Now, if you're not a real estate professional, you're a passive investor, then you can use this to offset other passive income that you have as well. And so just to kind of give you an idea, what qualifies, what type of real estate asset would qualify, right, for less than 20 years? Because we know multifamily and residential is 27.5 years straight line. We know commercial is 39 years, but you can look at land improvements, for instance, right? If you're in a real estate development project, well, you can't depreciate land, but you can depreciate land improvements. Land improvements has a 15-year useful life. So with that, any asset placed in service after January 19th would qualify for 100% bonus depreciation. So from an economic standpoint, if you have an asset that has maybe a 27-month takedown schedule with a builder, right, during that time period, let's say you have a project that costs $6 million for the land, $4.5 million for the improvements, right? You put in $100,000 in that situation. Well, let's say the bank's financing 65% of the project. You're getting bank financing at 8.3%. Wouldn't you say, Kylie, does that make about sense? It's about the interest rate right now and then, you're putting down 35% equity. You could either be invested in that deal on your own. Maybe it's a syndication, right? Maybe it's a DST for 1031 exchange investors. It could be a TIC structure. Could just be an LLC, investors owning membership units in the investment. You have 35% down. Well, you would divide 100,000 by that 3.67 million. That's the equity, right? That would give you about 2.72% ownership in that deal. Well, you multiply that 2.72 by the improvements, which is 4.5 million. That gives you about $122,400 in depreciation. Now, again, if all three of those assets if all these assets have to be placed in service, right, in order to qualify for bonus depreciation. So placed in service means that, utilities have been connected, the roads are drivable, lots are being sold to a builder, right? If all three of those phases are completed in 1 year, well, then you would get that huge $122,400 depreciation expense. But in reality, most of those are phased out over 2 years. Sometimes it could be 3 separate tax years. So you'd be able to take a third of that if it was over 3 separate tax years each year, that $122,400 and change. If it's 2 years, just divide it in 2. If it's 1 year, you get the full benefit, right?
So just clarify, Kevin, though, is that for investors or for the developer?
So basically that's going to be for investors. years, just across the board. Well, the developer is also going to be able to use that as well. He can offset that as well, right? If he's the only investor in the deal. So if a developer comes in and they're putting in 3.67 million in equity and the bank's financing the rest, they're going to get all those benefits as well.
Okay, let me do this, guys, if we can. I think this would be really helpful. Again, a lot of that stuff's high level. I'm sure a lot of people watching, just to go back to my scenario about the Airbnb investor. Let's say this. Let me give you a profile. So I'm an investor. I own a few Airbnbs. I manage them myself. Okay. I'm always looking for ways to keep more profit and grow my portfolio. So let's say, I'll give you this example, Kevin. I've got a couple of Airbnbs. They're doing well, but I'm getting crushed on taxes. How does the bonus depreciation change that for me, specifically about this Airbnb? Not that development, anything like that. How would that change it for me? That's my first question.
So,
then I've got a couple of
with the Airbnb, right? Airbnb, even though it's single family, it's going to go through 39 years. It's not 27.5 years like straight line. So if you own an Airbnb, what's the best thing that you can do? Well, you could probably do a cost segregation study, right? You can use a company like CSSI out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Cost Segregation Services Incorporated. They're going to go ahead and it's going to be an engineering-based study. And so they're going to look at all the different things that you can write off. So if you have a single family home, right, you basically can look at, you're going to have the fixtures, the lights, right?
So if I renovate the place, right? If I furnish a new kitchen, appliances, do those things qualify for bonus depreciation? Is that
those will qualify, absolutely. But either way, if you come in and you bought that property, right? So it has to be the same year that the asset was placed in service. If you buy the property that year, you're going to be able to offset, you're going to be able to write off anything that's going to be non-structural, right? So you can also look at, like, for instance, the driveway. That's 15 years, right? That's a 15-year depreciation. That's going to qualify for 100%. Anything with lights, fixtures, cabinets, countertops, that has a 5-year useful life. That qualifies for 100% bonus depreciation. So landscaping, that's going to qualify. That's a 15-year useful life. That'll qualify for 100% bonus depreciation. So let me just kind of give you an idea. I know a situation where a company, which is a real estate sponsor, they own a student housing apartment building in Salt Lake City, Utah, 66 units. They paid about $26 million for the property. And in that case, the land value represented about 20% of the purchase price. So they were able to depreciate 80% of the improvements, which was 80% of the purchase price, over 27.5 years, right? And so 30% during the cost segregation study of the 80% in improvements qualified for the cost seg study. So they were able to get a first year passive loss because they were all passive investors. There are some obviously limited partners that came into that deal too that could use that if they were real estate professionals. They could use that to offset W-2. But that generated a $3 million passive loss a year one, actually, from doing a cost seg study. So it could be pretty substantial, right? So if you're an LP, right, obviously you would be able to write off a prorated part of that $3 million. So again, during that investment time frame, if you were invested in that deal for 5 years, you're going to come out of there, probably still with a huge loss at the very end, right? Now, if there was a capital gain situation and they sold the property and you don't want to do a 1031 exchange, that could offset a large part of that capital gain. Most people will do a 1031. So they can use that loss, again, if they're a real estate professional, they can use it to offset other income like W-2 income, self-employment income, interest, capital gains, dividends, or if they were passive, use it to offset other passive.
Touch on that then, Kevin, just to bring it back to the question, the scenario with the Airbnb. So since, if I'm not mistaken, they're technically an active business, right? Short-term rentals. Can I use these deductions to offset my W-2 or other income?
If you're a real estate professional, absolutely.
Which is what exactly, Kevin, right? It's 100 hours a year dedicated to...
Yeah, if you're managing a short-term rental business, it's only 100 hours a year.
You mentioned something about when you can write them. Like, how fast can I claim these write-offs if I'm this Airbnb owner? Do I have to wait till tax season, or can I take the deductions straight away?
So basically, that year when you complete your taxes, right, you're going to go ahead, you're going to meet with your CPA. You'll be able to use it to offset that tax year.
Yeah, and you said that for this year it's 100%?
Yeah, this year it's 100% bonus depreciation.
Yeah, I think it's good to qualify as well.
And so with the big, beautiful bill, the House basically extended it to expire in 2030, but the Senate passed it pretty much it's never going to expire as of now, but we'll see what happens. So
I think it's good to clarify as well with, if you weren't going to go the Airbnb route and you were to go more the kind of like syndicated LP structure, normal everyday investor, wanted to invest 100,000 into XYZ deal. Even if you invested in October, November, December, you'd still be getting the full year's worth of bonus depreciation.
That's correct. Even if you invest on December 27th, it wouldn't make a difference. difference because you made that investment in 2025. So you're still going to get a K1 at the end of the year. If you're a partnership, you still qualify no matter what. So as long as one of the assets has been placed in service, the property has to be placed in service that time.
Yeah, which to me, I mean, at a high level, I think that that like really applies to the investor or the individual that maybe had like a really tremendous year that maybe they weren't anticipating, or they sold a business, or they sold off a bunch of stocks at a great gain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a tremendous way to kind of pull down some of that quote unquote taxable income. If you're fortunate enough to be in a case where you have to do that, right? And I think as we are talking about at a super high level, that's what some of the wealthiest investors in the world are doing. They're finding ways to pull down those numbers after they've had great years, and this is like achievable for normal people, right?
Right, absolutely.
Like even just like conceptually speaking, it's a lot of work to find an Airbnb in the right area and make all that work, and even just forking out 50 to 70 grand to redo the entire home. Hopefully you're in the right market, et cetera, et cetera. Now there's people that have done that and have done incredibly well, but there's other ways to make that happen.
Yeah, Airbnbs can be a nightmare. I ran those for quite a while. So
really quick, guys. So for Kevin, you mentioned if you're a professional investor, you can actually offset your W-2 income. If you're not professional investor, like where would someone like that? Because I've got a lot of investors in my social circles, and most of them invest in real estate, but none of them are like real estate professionals. So why does that behoove them to depreciate? I guess, does that negate their tax liability when it comes to like capital gains, or like what is the benefit for a non-professional investor?
Yeah, so that they would be considered passive investors. So
Mhm.
only if they have other types of investments that generate passive income. So again, I mean, it depends on if you're a multifamily investor, right? A lot of the times, if you buy a piece of property like in the Carolinas, right, or you bought a piece of property in Florida, California, where the land value pretty much represents like 50, 60% of the purchase price, you're not going to have a lot of depreciation. So you are going to owe taxes on that income. So this is where basically that type of investment can be used to offset that passive income as well.
I see. So if you're a passive investor, it only mitigates your tax liability against other passive revenue generating activities. But if you're a ultra high income earner and also a professional investor, can offset your W-2. So the question is, does it pay to just force yourself into becoming a professional investor so that you can offset that W-2 income? I mean, to me, it sounds like a no-brainer. How much work goes into that again, and like what do you actually have to do?
well, it's funny you say that, Daniel. I do have quite a few employees, and I try to talk a lot of them into becoming a 1099 because a lot of them don't understand the difference between 1099 and W-2 though.
Yeah.
And if you go through some of the, and you guys, a lot of you probably know this, but some of the basic processes, if you make $100,000 per year, I could show them how to write off. Usually on $100,000 per year, what do you guys pay? What would be your tax rate?
35%, aren't you?
Give or take, yeah, $35,000. Yeah. So, but you could show them ways with bonus depreciation, especially how to write off part of your house. Depends what your business is, obviously, or what kind of business they're associated with. But there's many ways to set that up. So, with all this money that's flown back to these businesses, I guess how does that help on the bigger scale?
Well, I could jump in. So when businesses have a huge tax deduction, right? They're going to go out and they're going to expand. And when they expand, they need to create more jobs. When you create more jobs, you increase consumer spending. And when you increase consumer spending, you create more jobs. And the economy just continues to prosper and grow. And it's best for everybody, just in general.
I think it's funny, like, and I probably I don't feel like I'm a big news guy, but every time I look at it, I feel like I watch too much news. It's funny because the people that always bitch and moan about, sorry if I swore on our first podcast, but the people that I see complain about this and hate on the wealthy for avoiding taxes, like they have no clue. It's like those are the people that's the reason why they have a job. Like that's the whole reason why that there's so much opportunity here, because like you said, Kevin, like it stimulates the economy, it stimulates jobs and job growth and higher salaries. It's laughable to me when I see people, even politicians, do it. It's almost like it's trendy to hate on being a savvy business owner, and ironically they're the people, the small few in this country that are creating all the jobs. It's just funny to me.
I just heard something, just want to bring this up, and I'm not going to get political here, but it's funny how you have a certain class that's badmouth and basically the big beautiful bill saying it only benefits billionaires. But in reality, what happened was the Democrat Party, if they decided that if this bill was so bad, it was going to create the biggest tax hike, because basically it was going to reduce the standard deduction in half. So 90% of all taxpayers were going to basically going to be paying a lot more in taxes, right? Because if you get the standard deduction, I believe right now, for an individual's, what is it, like 13,000 pretty much. So automatically you can write that off. And so the majority of the people, right, that aren't paying taxes is because of the standard deduction. And when I say 90% of the US taxpayers use the standard deduction, they don't itemize their deductions, right? So that was a huge tax benefit for everybody. So I'm not sure how that benefits only the billionaires. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it doesn't. The law applies to everybody, whether you're investing in one property or a 500 unit apartment building. So factually,
right,
it's there for everybody to use. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction. Kylie, this is something you might be able to answer because you were touching upon it with your employees. I always find it interesting. What would you think some of the biggest either mistakes people are going to make here, or maybe not mistakes, maybe opportunities that they may leave on the table because of that closed mindset, when it comes to these bills? I think a lot of people overlook it. Maybe they won't even talk to their CPA about it and really dig into it. What do you think you're going to see?
Well, I think the biggest thing they lose out on is because it's just what the rich think. It's not, how much money you make. It's how much money you keep. So like if I can make $100,000 per year and I keep all $100,000, that is a win-win. I don't, there's no other way to explain that. So like, even if you need to go out and buy a car or something else to depreciate it and write off more money, that's the only way to win in that situation. The reason why I try to convince employees, which there's no real benefit for it. Obviously I save a little bit of money on, taxes. It doesn't matter where you work. I've explained this to thousands of people that I've trained. You'll never get rich working for someone. Never. So you always want to follow what the rich are doing. So if you're making, whether it's $100,000 per year, $200,000 per year, there's ways to become rich, but that's only through investments. And the only way for those to make you rich is even what you guys were just talking about a little bit ago, which is through 1031s or ways to defer your tax or depreciate it, bonus depreciation, where if you could write off 100%, I do everything I can to write off all my income. So, I might only show I made a few $100,000 for the year, but that's so I could take that money and put it back into something that's going to make me hopefully tenfold. And I am a big investor on crypto. You guys know that, but there's a lot of great opportunities out there right now. And with the big, beautiful bill, I don't know what the amount was. It's pretty astronomical, but you're going to see over the next few months what that's going to do to the dollar, and employees need to be aware of that, which most of them aren't. They're just living day to day. Unfortunately, they got to understand that,
I love that saying, Carl, by the way. It's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. I think that's a t-shirt right there. There's the first piece of merch for the podcast, gentlemen.
Amen, brother. But yeah, no, for employees, there's a lot more and there's people like, I'm sure you guys read the story. This was probably 10, 15 years ago, but there was a guy that made like $17,000 per year. And when he died, he was worth like $14 million.
Yeah.
But it's because he invested his money. Yeah. But I think it was a janitor or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's a combination of things, bonus depreciation. So was he making $17,000 per year? Possibly, but he was probably not paying any money in taxes, and then he was investing it properly. So there's ways to become wealthy, but most people don't want to take that effort and put it into it. So when they're an employee of mine, I always try to put them in that mindset, because mindset's everything. I'm always looking for great people. It doesn't always matter about your skill set. It's more about your mindset of whether I want to work with you or not. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's large in part why we're even, doing this and trying to talk about it. Is it's a gigantic opportunity for, all people of all shapes and sizes. And no matter what your direct situation is, it could apply to you in some way, shape, or form, right? And, kind of as Kylie's talking about, it's a mindset thing. I think that a lot of people are conditioned to assume that they have to pay the taxes, and, the tax system itself is just so arbitrary. You don't know what the number is at the end of the day. If you don't pay the right number, they're going to throw you in jail, yada, yada, yada. But that's why you need, a good circle of people around you, the right investments, et cetera, because you've come up with a good plan and you realize that it works. It inspires you to, keep doing more of the same thing. And, all you got to do is get started and think about it. And 5 years down the road, your life could be completely different.
I got to ask you guys, have any of you guys owned a short-term rental? Because I know you guys were talking about that just a little bit ago.
No. Do you see, there's not many gray hairs on this podcast, so that should.
Man, I'm just trying to keep my hair. So everybody's.
Yeah, man, that makes two of us.
Well, I'm asking because, I used to manage thousands of rentals, and I've owned quite a few of them. So I still have one, which I'm about to sell off. Probably shouldn't give out that address, but it's over in St. Albans, Missouri. Beautiful, beautiful home. Nightmare of a situation. I spent, what did I buy that thing for? $580,000, right? And it's in a multi-million-dollar area. I expected to rent that thing for about $500 to $800 per night, which we were getting pretty close to. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, because just some of the headaches with business. So you got to understand you're going to go through this. And this isn't every situation, but if you're going to focus on trying to, create your business and do bonus depreciation, there's going to be things that you run into. So know these headaches, but be with someone that has probably already went through it so they can help guide you. My neighbor ended up being, I don't even want to call him a Karen, but he was pretty rough to deal with. So every time I had someone staying at my short-term rental, it was professionally managed. He would call.
You didn't manage it yourself, Kylie. You had someone manage it.
I didn't. And it's funny because I own a property management company. I didn't even manage myself because it became such a nightmare that I didn't want to have to deal with it. And he would be calling the security all the time. I became great friends with the HOA over there. Still pretty good friends with them. But it just became a nightmare. So I ended up having their attorneys get involved. My attorneys had to get involved. We're pretty much resolving it. But at this point, this is just a lesson learned. I'm going to end up selling that property just because of all the nightmares that my neighbor caused. I'll probably take a loss on this one, but it's a lesson learned. I wish I would have followed the advice of somebody else of not to do this project. I thought it was going to be great, but that was because of the write-offs. There's a little different situation there.
Right, that's where wisdom is gained, my friend, through,
through
the experience.
That's why I stick with what I know, guys. Like there's a few things I know very well, like development. I know development, forwards and backwards. I've been doing it for a long time, but short-term rentals, we had our niche that we were in with resorts, and we did amazing at it. So some of these one-offs.
Let me ask you a question that I'm sure a lot of people get stuck up on. Let's say somebody has $100,000 sat in a CD getting himself 2%, and they're considering getting into real estate.
You're cutting out a little bit, Gio.
Where would you suggest they start?
Gio, you are cutting out,
He's
brother.
Right in the middle of the question, is he? Oh, there you go.
They've got $100,000. I'll jump in.
Am
If
I?
you got $100,000, where would you recommend somebody start to utilize things like this that we're talking about?
Invest in real estate.
So are they looking to invest in real estate? Or are they looking to open a business? You got to find out what your desire is, because my opinion might be completely different than yours and what your risk tolerance is. I have 3 things that I really focus on, which real estate's probably number 1. I personally love crypto as well, but that's a different type of write-off. The bonus depreciation, Kevin's better at that. He can jump into that a little bit more. But real estate, man, the most successful people in the world, what do they own?
Real estate, baby.
Yep.
90% of millionaires are in real estate.
So I'm going to always refer them back to that. Now, how they do that, they got to, decide on what's, the best avenue for them, whether that's a short-term rental, which I'm not opposing, but you guys got to remember short-term rentals were hammering back in, 2021 during COVID, 22, 23, right around 24, that fell off the deep end. So not saying Airbnbs are bad as long as you have them in the right location, but that might not be the business plan for a newbie. It might be more of just a buy and hold long-term rental kind of situation, or fix and flips, or developments. There's a bunch of other things out there that pay very good returns with great bonus depreciation. Actually, I didn't even know there was 100% bonus depreciation this year. I thought it was 40 or 50%. So that's why I got Kevin on here and handed off to my tax accountants. Let them handle that part of it.
You don't use TurboTax, Kylie?
No. They do pretty well, but no, I haven't used them since I was like 19 years old.
Yeah, going back to the people that hate on people with money, they use TurboTax for sure.
Yeah.
They probably hear the word CPA, they're like, CPA, that's for rich people. I use TurboTax.
Well, what's the general cost of a CPA?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I pay a lot. Mine's expensive, but they've got my back if something happens. Like I pay $700 for my personal return, and then
relative, Daniel. So how much they say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I think $400 for personal, $700 for my business, which is like steep as far as CPAs go for how complicated my business is, which is not at all. Yeah.
Well, based on what you're saying, the reason why I was asking those, because and it's all correlated based on how much money you make. So if I spend $100,000 on an accountant, right, just paying the accountant, is that worth it? But they saved me $3 million.
Absolutely.
Same situation. So a lot of people, their problem, I shouldn't say problem, they're just not knowledgeable enough. They don't have that information known, hey, I can spend $1,200 versus paying $100, and I'll end up saving, $10, $15, $20,000 on, depreciation or different write-offs.
Yep.
So I think that's a huge part that most people miss.
Well, I'll share a personal story. I used to do home improvement. I did probably $10 million worth of home improvement projects in Collier County, Florida. And my first year in the business, I was making all this money, and I was like, I'm going to go buy a brand new truck. And I was using TurboTax at the time. And when I entered in the purchase price of that truck, I did not owe 1 red cent of taxes that entire year. It was bananas. This stuff is great. Of course, when I sell my truck, I still have it. I'll have to pay the recapture tax, but I'm going to run that thing into the ground. So hopefully I won't Won't have to.
There's better ways of doing that. But yeah, that's why I bought a truck every year, or I'll lease a vehicle every year for my wife and just put it on the business, especially if it's in a certain weight ratio,
Yep. 6,000 pounds.
Yep. 6,000. I guess the next touching point that we're going to focus on, and you guys know I'm part of this already. So it's more of like an M7A, or M&A, however you want to word it. You guys can give me your feedback on that, but we're in the middle of purchasing property management companies. So there's a big craze going on around that right now. What benefits would that bring for bonus depreciation? Because, we're looking to buy as many property management companies throughout the United States. So on our aspect, we're not buying tangible real estate. It's just a business. So for the average business owner to come in and be involved with what we're trying to do, how would they benefit from that? Whether we purchase their company or whether they stay part of it and we started to buy them out, but they started on so they would get the bigger benefit when we sold later on the roll-up.
That is completely other world to me. I've never been involved in anything like that.
How would this person benefit if you come in and you first buy a minority interest or eventually buy a controlling interest and then at some point buy out the whole thing? Well, one, it provides liquidity for him, right? So the guy has liquidity. Not only that, if you're going to be buying this guy out, you're going to come in and say, okay, here's the situation. If I'm going to be buying a controlling interest, maybe I buy 55% of the company, or if I'm going to buy a minority interest, maybe 40% of the company, I'm still going to require that the executive team stays on board for 5 years, right? Maybe you're going to structure an earnout. Maybe it's going to be like, okay, this company's worth $2 million. I'll give you $1 million right now. But in order for you to achieve $2 million, you got to generate, 75% of whatever your 2024 EBITDA was, or some sort of an earnout structure is one way. Two, again, you're doing what most private equity firms do. A lot of private equity firms will go in there and they'll see a company that's a SaaS company, software as a service company. It's doing $10 million in annual recurring revenue, but they got some great contracts in place. They're like, we're going to help them scale and get up to maybe $50 million in revenue. And they're selling it eight times ARR, right? And so they could basically make a huge $200-300 million profit on a 5-year hold. That's pretty much the business model. But there's always an exit. There's always a 5-year exit, right? So you keep the executive team on for 5 years. You basically scale the company. You use your financial resources to scale the company. And then you have a liquidity event in 5 years and you make a huge return. So it's a good business model.
Yeah. And speaking of buying businesses, I feel like we are currently witnessing one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history, with the baby boomers just coming of age and wanting to sell their businesses. I am seeing businesses form like educational products. Like I see all these gurus online. They're creating educational products that teach people how to buy businesses. So they made a business out of buying businesses, which there are a ton for sale. I guess the thing that I'm wondering is, like, if you buy a business and you have all these intangible assets, like you were saying, Kylie, but you also have the equipment, you're also buying a building. Like when you buy a business, can you evaluate like the value of those tangible assets and depreciate them just like in any other situation? Or does anybody know anything about that?
You can amortize intangible assets. You can't depreciate them. You can only depreciate tangible assets.
Got it. So like let's say I buy a construction company, probably like a car wash or a laundromat, where I have all of these, machines and equipment and stuff like that. Can I not depreciate that?
There's a lot of stuff you could buy from that. So the building and all the machines are going to depreciate, but
right.
It just depends on what all you're buying at that point. So for like a car wash, you're going to have to replace stuff nonstop.
Sure.
There's all the, I don't even know the details of it, but all the machines that are going through there's a lot of pieces that need to be repaired and fixed. So that's all depreciable, but so is the building that it's in. The real estate is not, correct, Kevin? So that's a piece of land that's not going to depreciate, but the building will itself.
Yeah, office build outs and the leasehold improvements and stuff like that.
You can also use Section 179 to expense a lot of items too, which is much better than actually using depreciation, because you expense it and you can expense 100% of it the first year, and you can avoid, if you depreciate it, right, then eventually you're going to be paying recapture tax. So it just depends on the situation. But like equipment and machinery has a 5-year useful life. Office furniture and fixtures have a 7-year useful life. Soft computers have a 5-year. Vehicles have a 5-year. So they all qualify for 100% bonus.
Kevin, what's the 179 section though? Because that's still correlated with bonus depreciation. They're completely different though. They're not part of the same.
Right. So there's certain items that you can just expense 100% the first year. So it's just going to be an expense. When you're basically looking at your P&L, you have your revenue minus your expenses. It's just going to be basically just 100% expensed. If you want to kind of give me an idea of a business that you're running and throw some things at me, I can tell you what you can expense and what you would depreciate and what you would amortize.
Well, we kind of spoke about it a little bit ago. So like
Yeah.
on property management, that's one thing. You have very minimal things that I think you can write off.
Right.
But on land development and subdivisions, there's a tremendous amount you can write off. So it depends on what type of business it is as well. So on land development, the land, costs $6 million, like you mentioned earlier, but you have, $5-6 million in additional expenses, whether that's utilities, roads, and all that stuff. That's all 100% write off, correct?
Right. You have the roads you depreciate, right? Utilities you can depreciate. Retaining walls you can depreciate. Legal costs, for instance, would be amortized. And so it depends on the time frame of the investment. So the amortization is going to be based on, because again, once there's a liquidity event, that's when it expires. So if it's 3 years, you could take a third every single year. If it's 5 years, you could take a fifth. 1 out of 5, pretty much. What can you expense for Section 179? Interior non-structural improvements to non-residential buildings. That would qualify for Section 179 and not depreciation, for instance.
So with the bonus depreciation, though, is that more about saving money on taxes or keeping your money moving faster into newer projects?
Well, it depends. I mean, obviously, at the end of the year, if you get a huge loss, you can use whatever you're going to pay in taxes and use that to reinvest into a new project, right? So as a developer, that's how you can scale. So instead of writing a check to the IRS for $200,000, for instance, you can use that $200K and reinvest that into a new project. Yeah, but you could be talking millions. It could be substantial. So
yeah, so it's kind of like your 1031 investor. That
I'll
would
tell you, I think a good takeaway.
Go ahead, Gio. You're cutting out a little bit, bud.
So yeah, I think I've got a bit of a bad connection. But what I was saying, I think a good takeaway for people listening, because a lot of this stuff is high level, especially when, our resident AI, Kevin, gets in there because of his knowledge. But a very simple thing again, it goes back to what you were saying, Daniel, about coughing up the money. Pay for a good CPA, I would say. Pay for somebody that will do this for you. Structure your taxes for you the right way. And I think that's so important. Like, we don't need, as entrepreneurs or anybody looking to get ahead in life, we don't need to be experts in every field. That's not and you can speak to this, Kylie, I'm sure. You need to hire the right people. And I think that can be really powerful. And to go to your point, Daniel, about these gurus online, I read a lot of books and I follow a lot of those guys actually, because I actually think between real estate and businesses, it's the biggest shift in wealth that we're going to have in our lifetime. And it's one of the biggest opportunities. I'll give you a little stat. 70% of businesses, small, medium-sized, and do not sell. They shut their doors. And I'm talking businesses because they're, these are profitable businesses. So that's where there's a massive opportunity. All the baby boomers, they own the majority of real estate in this country. And I know we've had some of these conversations offline. I've been thinking about this as an opportunity for the last few years. Obviously, it's about taking action on it, but it's a massive opportunity. They own all the real estate. They own all the businesses. Their kids may not want it, or even if they do inherit it, the kids, they don't want to run it, so they want to offload it. So to summarize, huge opportunity for everybody. And that's what I think these gurus have tapped onto. And then the other side to that is, if let's imagine I'm a guru and I'm coaching 1,000 people to go and find business opportunities in their own network, and they're bringing me the deal. Well, I've created myself a lead generation machine for opportunity, right? So it's really good to teach people the education they need. They bring the deal to them. They can help actually take the deal down. And the person who finds the deal can have equity in that deal and perhaps a life-changing event themselves. So I see it as a good thing. I don't know whether there was an underlying tone of it being bad or what, but my opinion, I think there's obviously bad apples, but I think it's a great opportunity. And
I think it's great.
To hear your thoughts, Jen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was gonna say, like, I see a boring business as some of these gurus. Cody Sanchez is one of these people that I follow. She's pretty cool. Yeah. She calls them boring businesses, right? Like, there's not much to it. I could definitely see myself, but I would definitely want a car wash. I've already got the idea. Like, I imagine like buying this kind of like a little bit of like a rundown self car wash, but I want like speakers. And like, I want it to play music, and it's just like, it's cool, it's clean, it's awesome, and just do the things that maybe an older generation business owner would never.
I can see it now, Daniel, the Chippendales of the car wash business.
I've actually, she released a book recently. I read it. It's actually really good. I think it's called The Main Street Millionaire. It kind of walks through all of it. To me, at a high level, like, if we're talking to somebody or somebody's listening to this that hasn't even considered buying a business, it's kind of like those steps that Kyle was talking about regarding mindset, right? That might be like way too much to chew off for the very beginning steps, but if you find find an investment deal that like kind of checks all of the boxes for you. You get into that, you see some of these bonus depreciation numbers, they affect your life positively. You invest in another one. From a mindset perspective, it like kind of pushes you down the road as far as even being open to something like that and seeing the possibility. And I feel like, with this bonus depreciation stuff, it's only going to help you get closer to like the person that you want to be. You're smart. Not a lot of people know about this stuff, right? So even just being like a source of influence within your own circles, knowing about it, talking about it, I just think that helps everybody tremendously to kind of grow their portfolio, whatever it is that their goals are, helps them get there.
Yeah, I love that, Andrew. I think, to answer my own question about that 100,000, I would actually use a portion of it to invest in education if I'm at that stage, right? Invest in yourself, get educated, because I think unless you've got a certain amount, you're undercapitalizing a lot of these things. How much in real estate you're going to get with 100 grand? How long is it going to take you to grow that? So maybe you go get educated, you spend 50,000, get educated in something you've got passion about, and then you learn to scale, you get around the right people. I mean, that's why we're all here, right? Kylie is a good mentor for all of us, right? He's in a better place further forward down the road. Kevin's got, everybody's got something to offer. Hopefully everybody's got something to give as well, right? That's a big part of the connection and the network that you create around you. And yeah, that's what I think I would do. I'd invest a big portion of that into education and then go out there and scale from there.
I like that, Gio, because that's what the Bible states. Not trying to geek out on you, but if you read Proverbs, wisdom is key, man. So, and it's kind of my saying, I guess, but bonus depreciation for me, I've been a business owner for a long time, so it's like a tax rebate for growing the economy. That's kind of how I look at it.
And by the way, the Bible's the OG of self-help books, so it's okay to mention it, I think
it is. Most people don't read it, but yeah. Back in Proverbs, that's why I was reading.
Millions of copies sold.
Yeah, isn't it the best-selling book still of all time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Cody Sanchez's book has got a long way to go.
Absolutely. And going back to like biting off more than you can chew, which is the word that you use, Andrew. Like when you said that, I was thinking like, man, you can with all these people that are just going to close their business. Statistically, the majority are just going to close their doors. Those are the type of people you could walk up to and be like, hey, let me take a crack at this. I'm not going to pay you anything up front. You can still be a silent owner. I'm just going to assume operations and like creatively finance the deal to where you assume ownership over revenue share over time. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You don't lose your hide. They've got nothing to lose. I mean, there's so much opportunity. Whether it's buying a business, using a CPA instead of TurboTax, like leveraging bonus depreciation and not hating on wealthy, savvy people. I mean, there's so much opportunity in this country, and like just talking throughout this entire session and listening to you guys, I've just, man, it kind of wakes you up to the fact that first of all, this is just the greatest country in the world, but there's so much opportunity out there. Like whether it's buying a business, like keeping more of your money just by doing some homework, it's bananas. So when I see people complaining, I just think, well, like you're just not resourced enough. You haven't bothered to seek out the resources. The people who do the homework, because the government's not going to teach any of us this stuff, right? It pretends like, oh yes, there's all these great benefits, but notice how there isn't any like educational, like government education on how to mitigate your tax income, right? So it's just funny. It just comes up for me how much opportunity there is.
Yeah, you guys got to remember, we're going to wrap up in just a moment, but as long as it doesn't go against your morals, you got to follow the people that are already doing what you want to do. So if you want to be wealthy, you got to follow where they're at. You got to do what they do. Bonus depreciation is a huge part of that. So I think but do you guys have anything else, last words that you want to throw out real quick?
Yeah, I'll speak to that, Kylie. I would say, to summarize it, get educated on this stuff, right? It's only your own fault if you don't. Get around the right people. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're doing something wrong.
Yep.
That much is for damn sure. And take advantage of it. You shouldn't feel guilty about paying less tax, should you? I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
I think that's a massive piece of this. I think people are scared to pay less taxes. I think that they're doing something wrong.
We'll have a whole nother conversation on this.
I think it's a crime. It's not a crime if it's under the letter of the law. The code is there for us all to use. So.
Well, taxes is kind of illegal, but we'll chat about that on another podcast. We'll be doing this at least once a week, guys. So, but yeah, guys, that's the end of our podcast for the day. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Please like and subscribe, and we will chat with you next week.